So at one point in the late 90s to the early 2000s, children and adults everywhere finally read a book called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And they read the book and were happy to read it. And they knew the story, and they were all happy about the story. They were fans of the story, and all the kids were like, "Oh, I want to know about Harry Potter, but this book is a lot of stuff, a lot of reading, I hate the reading." And they're 10-year-olds, they're like, reading bad, I don't want to watch a movie. And then Warner Brothers finally comes around and says, we're going to make the movie. We're going to make a movie called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And they were going to advertise it all over the place. So they showed all the characters off. They showed all the acting, the casting, the trailers. And everybody was happy, including all of the people who read the book. And when the movie finally came out, the people were like, yeah, man, this is awesome. Turn of the century, and we get something so great and happy, and Christmas movie is good. Everybody's happy, everybody's all look at that. People who read the book look at this and say, hey, yeah, more or less what happens in the book happens in this movie. I would say it's called a faithful adaptation. A faithful adaptation is something that comes from one format, and when it's adapted into another format, it more or less resembles what it was adapting. That's what the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Philosopher's Stone is. It is a faithful adaptation. It's not 100%. No, the book people read the book people, and they go like to watch the movie at the turn of the century, and they go like, not everything's the same. They cut some stuff out. Some of these scenes in the book, they don't happen in here, and some of the dialogue's changed up and all that stuff. But more or less, from the characters to what we imagined Hogwarts to look like, it all came to life in such a beautiful way that everybody was happy. For the kids who don't like reading books, watching the movie, finally getting their story in, and the people who like reading the books, and they were all so happy to see Hogwarts in visual format. It's the visual medium. That's what a faithful story is. The faithful adaptation. It's another medium in which to consume the story. Yes, that's what Harry Potter is. That's also what Lord of the Rings with Peter Jackson was. It was a faithful adaptation. Yes, a faithful adaptation. They took some liberties, and Findy Gorfy got thrown out of there, and Arwen Wen comes in on the horsey horse, speaking in tongues to the horse to drive it faster, carrying a short person to the Halloween riverbed, or whatever. And then the horsies in the water come and trample over the Black Riders, and they go flying away, They make a lot of changes, but it's a faithful adaptation all the same. All of the major story beats that you saw and read in the book happen in the movies. There's no Dol Amroth, but the Rohirrim come and they rout the frickin' armies. And Aragorn shows up. He may not show up with the same army in the book, but he shows up with an army and routs the rest of them, and then there's the battle at the Black Gate, and the Mouth of Sauron shows up in the extended cuts. Everything happens the way the book shows it. Not in the exact same ways, but it happens. Yes. An even longer time ago, there was a thing in Japan called a cartoon. A lot of people watched Disney movies back in the day, And they went like, you know, that Walt Disney boy was very cool in all of his shows, and the Mickey Mousers, and the Johnny Rants, and the Rabbit Rabbities, and they're all like, we like this, let's make our own stories. And Mr. Sakazuki makes Astro Boy, and the Astro Boy shows up. And then they're starting to make manga books, manga mungos, and they're drawing their little papers, comic books, Japanese comic variation. They're not comic books, don't get upset. So the Japanese mangas, they make the stories and all that stuff, and then the animators are like, you know what, we should put this on TV. So they adapt it. And sometimes the adaptations are completely verbatim, and sometimes they're completely different, and sometimes they're right smack in the middle. All of the major story beats happen, but then you get filler with, like, Garlic Jr. coming back, and Marin on the bikini on the Roshi Island, and Turtle has a birthday. Gohan goes on extra adventures out in the wilderness. Piccolo fights clones of himself. Krillin knows the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and all sorts of liberties are taken that are not in the manga version. Would you say, though, that this is an adaptation that is faithful? That's what anime is, right? It's supposed to be faithful, but no, sometimes the anime is completely different. You know... Sometimes you get a manga man who makes a manga man mangers with called the Yu-Yus of the Hakusho. Sometimes he makes a story, fills it with plenty of side stories and all sorts of adventures that don't show up in the anime adaptation. You know, there's some of the highlights are showing up, but they cut out a lot of stuff, like the boy and his dog, and the ghost kid and his ghost thing. Sometimes the highlights show up with Kuwabara and his math test. So sometimes they do that, but then they change it up, you know. And then sometimes when you have your final Three Kings saga... Sometimes in your final Three Kings saga of the season 4 of the Yu Yu Hakusho, the manga's version of the Three Kings story is almost completely 100% different in the anime adaptation. Sometimes the adaptation is so different that it pisses off the manga fans almost completely. And they go like, this isn't what we were expecting at all. You need to stop! And then the people who didn't read the manga come in and they watch the anime and go like, why did you stop? And then the manga fans come in and say, hey, read that manga, boy. And they read it and they go like, oh, this is very different. Why'd they change all this stuff in the manga adaptation? And then the manga fan says, this old disgruntled manga fan who has read so many mangas and watched so many animes comes in and says, once upon a time, a man had an idea. And that idea was different from somebody else's idea. So he took a giant pen and said, this is your idea. This is me with your idea, and this is my idea. And we're gonna put my idea into your IP. And that, my friends, is how we do the angeriness. Sometimes, even long ago in the 70s, they make a good slasher slashy slash. And the people watched it. And they said, this is a good slashy slashy slash. But then, 20 years later, maybe even 30 years later, somebody says, you know, We should tell this story again. But you know, there's some parts of this story that kind of pissed me off. So let's take a big eraser and erase that out. We're gonna add our own little ideas in, and we're gonna make it again. So when we make it again, the people come in and they watch and they say, hey, that guy who was in that chair who made a lot of complaints in this version, he's not in here anymore. And then the screaming and the angry at the dinner party shows up, and in the dinner party, the angriness of here that felt like genuine anger and very genuinely uncomfortable, both from a viewer perspective and from everybody in the angry, screaming dinner table scene, kind of feels a little bit different, the adaptation. But overall, people who watched this in the 2000s said, hey, you know what? This is kind of a nice, faithful remake. You might like this one a little bit more, though. Sometimes a very cool movie comes out that everybody likes, but it's kind of all dated-y and all indie. So they make a sequel that's so friggin' amazing and so friggin' budgetedly well and all that cool stuff. And we learn about John Connor and how he's the future hero of mankind. And so 20 years later, somebody comes around and says, you know about that John Connor guy? He's kind of a dick. So let's make him the bad guy. And it pisses everybody off, and we're all like, ugh. And so, now, in the 2020s, sometime in the late 2010s, probably more likely, some big people at an A said, hey, you know that story of the Game and the Thrones and all the knives and the cool things and all of the adult scenes and dark fantasy that everybody liked? What was it called? Game of was it chess? No. Was it Game of Chairs? Is it musical chairs? No, it wasn't that. Was it a Game of Bed? No. Game of Thrones! That's it. It's called Game of Thrones, right? And so the big people at the big A said, you know, we don't have the rights to do that. Let's do this guy. Let's make an adaptation of this guy's stuff, and we're gonna make it so that we piss everybody off who read this book. It's not gonna be, but we're gonna change all the. And so, Lex Luthor says, alright, the Wheel of Time didn't exactly go too well. Maybe we should do this. We're gonna do this instead. Oh, yes. We're gonna go into the. Oh, wait, we don't have the rights to all that crap. What can we get from you, Mr. Estate? Can we buy the rights to make a TV show? 5 seasons. We want to set it in a different age. We're not going to mess with your lore, Mr. Estate. Oh no, we're gonna make a TV show based in the Second Age. Yes. And so Mr. Estate Man said, alright, you see this? You see the back here? The back here that's called the appendix? The appendix here, well, it's bursting with appendixes, and you're gonna take into all of this, right? You're gonna take into this, and you can look at all of that. You got the rights to all of that, all that stuff, which our patron figurehead, Jordan Richard Robert Rumpkins Tolkien, that's his name. That's it. This man, he sold these rights for a tax break back in the forever ago times. And he said, we now have the rights to that, and we're gonna give that to you. You could buy that from us and make a 5-season TV show. But since you want to set it in the Second Age, we don't have the rights to good Second Age like this. So instead of using the silver little bit of this, you gotta use the Return of the King's appendices, the appendix. There's not too much in here, but there's probably a bit in here. And we go like, yes, we got all this on this page. These 2 pages here. Pause your cameras and take a look at this blurry ass blah. And we got all this that we can adapt into our show. And what do we let's take a look at all this. We want to set it around the death of El. No, we don't want to set it around that. We could say that the Region is founded by the Noldor. Yeah, we could do that. And Sauron, alarmed by the growing power of the Númenóreans, chooses Mordor as a land to make into a stronghold. Exactly 1,000 years into the Second Age. Let's do that. We're definitely gonna do that. Yes, we're definitely gonna do that. Let's say if 200 years later, Sauron endeavors to seduce the Eldar, and Gil-galad refuses to treat with him. The Smiths of Eregion are run over. The Númenóreans begin to make permanent havens and colonies in the good. Well, it's 200 years later. We're gonna probably make it 2 weeks after this. 2 weeks after the C-100. We're gonna smudge that out. Tarn Calumet with the new ruling queen. Why would we do that? Why would we talk about that queen? We're gonna talk about another one. The 3 rings are completed. Oh, that's 590 years after what we wanted. Nah, we're gonna make it 5 weeks later. Oh, definitely. Okay, what else did we want to do? Sauron forges the 1 week. He's gonna forge that 1 week later after that. Yes. Even though it was 10 years later, it's gonna be 10 hours later. Yeah. Okay. So we have here, within the decade, the War of the Elves of Sauron, 1690s. We're gonna probably make that over a course of a week in the next season, or we're probably gonna scribble it all out again. What else? Tar Minister, he's dead now. Let's see, Sauron is driven out of Eriador. He might be. We're gonna make him driven out by... Wait a minute. Her name isn't even on here. We wanted to make Galadriel on here, but she's not even in the Second Age. Where is her name mentioned? Where is it mentioned? Galadriel. Well, whatever. We're gonna scribble that name out, and we're gonna add Galadriel in there. Okay. Death of Tarion Tenmar, he's gone. Umbar, who cares? Pelargir, alright, we're probably gonna top that. We're probably gonna talk about Pelargir. It is the chief haven of the faithful in Númenóreans. We mentioned that. What is that? It's 1,350 years after what we want. No, we're gonna say it's an old abandoned colony. It was probably founded even further in the past. Yes, we're gonna scribble that out. Tar and Duna, who cares about that? And repentance of Tar Palantir. We're probably going to leave that. Civil War, Numenor. What? We're probably going to make it some civil unrest. Our Faris on the Golden Seasons, he might do that in the next season. He might. Let's see. Sauron is taken as prisoner. Maybe, but he was already a prisoner. Yes, we're gonna make him a prisoner in this 3rd episode, and he's gonna whisper to Pharazôn off screen. We're gonna reveal it that way. Yes. Our Pharazôn sails to Valinor. We're probably gonna make that happen. Maybe in the 5th season. We're probably gonna do that in the 4th or 5th seasons. We're gonna surprise our fans, though. Ooh, yes, we're gonna surprise it. Ooh, Elendil is mentioned 2,000 years later? No, we're gonna say, if we then look at all this time, we're gonna say, no, we're gonna scratch out all that. We're gonna say, alright, he's alive at this point in time when the rings are made, yes. That means all this will happen in the 5th season. Okay, so we've smushed it all together, all that. So we got 2 pages, and that's not a lot here. And if we look at the 3rd age, we've got this. Oh, we've got a lot here. What's all this here? What do we get here? Ooh. So this is all the events of the 3rd age. Look at all of that. Okay. So we could have done all this. This is the 3rd age. But instead, we're just going to do this. There's not a lot of information. I know there's not a lot of information, meeting board people. But hear me out. Hear me out. We don't have a lot of information here. So let's cut half of it out and only talk about part of it. And make up the rest. It'll do well. It'll be great. Because after all, as we say in our behind-the-scenes information, when we look here about faithful adaptations, faithful stories, when we want to not do that because we want to surprise our readers. We want to surprise the readers. You see, the readers, they read all of that. They know about all that stuff that we wanted to do. So we're going to cut it all out and make primarily, mostly 90% of it, 95% of it, 95% of it is going to be new information. Most of our characters are going to be new characters. Right? So the readers, they're not going to know who any of these guys are, right, Mr. Board members? All those, and the old characters, the old ones, are going to be unrecognizable. We're going to make them unrecognizable. They're not going to understand them. Elrond, Galadriel, Gilgalad, Celebrimbian, Santa Claus, Sauron. We're going to make all of these guys unrecognizable. The people who have been following their journeys for the past decades and decades. Everybody alive has been alive since the rings were made. And there they all know these stories. They've read all this stuff. They know these characters through and through, in and out. So we're gonna take the core facets of their characters and we're gonna scribble all over it. You know, that kind of looks like the black script of Mordor. But we're going to call it the Southlands. Oh, yes. The past 23 minutes was a series of insanities for your entertainment. But to be serious for a moment, this video is primarily made out of response to some behind-the-scenes information that I learned about regarding the Rings of Power. One or both of the showrunners went on a podcast, and this is official release podcast, all that stuff. And in this behind-the-scenes information, they talked about their intent to create a mostly original story that hadn't been told, and most of the stuff that was in the book and the appendices and all that information and all these characters, they wanted to make their own story with the intent to not only surprise newcomers with information in the mystery boxes and all that stuff, but they also wanted to surprise the veterans, the readers who've read all these books, who know this story through and through. What they wanted to do was make it so that they would be just as surprised as the newcomers and the casuals who haven't read these books, who don't know the Second Age at all. They wanted those veterans to be guessing about what's going to happen in the next episode just as often as the ones who hadn't even read the books. Did they succeed, though? I would argue, technically, yes. They did succeed. In probably the wrong ways. Everything was so different. The chain of events, the time compression, the characters and their personalities. We were very confused, and we were guessing what's going to happen in the next episode because we didn't know. All of this stuff was completely new and changed from what we recognized, that we were looking at something completely foreign. And I would argue that the intent to make something interesting and new to the veterans backfired upon them. Because, as I showed you in an earlier version of this, in the early part of this video, Harry Potter was a faithful adaptation to the books. Everybody who watched those movies probably read the books or went to read the books after watching the movies, and they ended up getting pretty much more or less the same story in both versions. It's a visual medium and there's a reading medium and all that stuff. One creates the story and the backdrops and the characters and their designs using your own imagination. The scenes are a little bit different. Some of the set pieces and all that stuff that work better in a book format or changed in the film format, but it was more or less the same story. And I would argue that most fans of this universe of Tolkien were expecting something like Harry Potter to happen here. Granted, we don't exactly have a lot of information to have adapted from those appendices. As I showed you, there were only 2 pages of the timeline of events in the Second Age that we could pull from. We also have an annal of kings and list of all the kings of Numenor and some of the queens of Numenor. We know all of that. We know their basic Terraverse information regarding them and who they were. But we had enough information to set up a plotline. And probably in our next installment of the Rings of Power, we're going to do a what could they have done. We're not going to be nice. We're just going to make our own version from the appendices, just using the same limited resources. Could we have made an adaptation, an 8-episode adaptation of the first season? How would we have done it? That's probably going to be the next episode. If this format of insane ramblings entertained you in the barest sense of the word, then I guess that would mean that my idea paid off, and you have been entertained. Be imaginative, everybody.